Hi everybody, I'm back for part 2 of my little tutorial here on experiments and quasi-experiments and experimental control and random assignment and some of the topics that are essential to understanding these methods and appreciating the power of them. So I'm just going to pick up right where I left off with a few examples to kind of get at the concepts that I was explaining in the first video, and also address how to analyze a study in terms of threats to internal validity will be part of this discussion too. So let me minimize this. All right. Okay, I think I've got everything set. Sorry for that delay. So this is where I left off, and what I want to do in the second part is just go over some examples of experimental control and how different experimental designs or study designs, some experimental, some not, and different features of those designs help you provide greater evidence that the independent variable was indeed the cause of your study, and that there wasn't some extraneous variable working in your study. So let's just go over a quick example. Okay, I've got a fake example here. A fake person named Taylor is a graduate student in public health who's also a teacher at a middle school. I imagine Taylor being a she, so she is interested in preventing kids from experimenting with smoking. Of course, as a middle school student, you probably see lots of kids. Middle school teacher, you see kids experimenting with smoking as part of their experience at that age. And she's particularly interested in some new computer-based technology to prevent a smoking cessation program. And I know I have here versus current classroom techniques for preventing smoking program, but we'll expand on that concept as we go along. But for now, her real interest is in these computer-based modules. So let's take a look at an example of how she might examine whether these modules are worthwhile, if they are effective, if they are a causal factor in preventing kids from experimenting with smoking, if they can have that kind of influence. So let's go with her first attempt at a study here, which is presented here. And she teaches in middle school, so she interacts with a lot of ninth graders, and so her first thought, her first attempt at designing a study to test these modules is to do just one group, just a pretest and a post-test. I'll assess folks at baseline, and then I'll administer the computer modules. Then I'll assess whether they've changed at the end of the semester. And this is a one-group pretest, post-test. Then the independent variable in this study is the computer modules, and the dependent variable is did you smoke in the last 2 weeks, arbitrary time period. But we're looking at whether or not they're experimenting with smoking. Did you have a cigarette in the last 2 weeks? And one of the things that's useful in thinking about experimental designs is thinking about conceptualizing them from the results or the expected results you might see and doing the analysis there. And so let's say these are the hypothetical results she got. She assessed smoking at pretest at the beginning of the semester, post-test was at the end of the semester. In between, the kids completed the modules, and these are the results she found, which are maybe not what she had anticipated. But what we find is that at pretest, rates of smoking are quite low, but at post-test they're higher, right? And I guess one interpretation of this might be that engaging in these modules makes kids curious about smoking because the rates are higher at the end, and so they're trying it out more after they engage in these modules. Just because we posit the computer modules as a causal factor doesn't mean they can't have the opposite effect that we intend them to have. However, there are a number of issues, alternative explanations, what I've labeled here as confounds, that prohibit us from interpreting this in any convincing way, any way that we're certain what happened. And some of the more noteworthy potential confounds in this study are listed here, but certainly one of them is maturation. One of the things we know about kids who are in ninth grade is they experiment with stuff, and a semester-long period of time is maybe is significant. It's not a week. It's significantly long. That that at the beginning of ninth grade, very few kids had tried smoking, but boy, once they've been halfway into the semester and exposed to other ninth graders, they get older. They're curious. They want to try it. So, just kind of a natural maturational process could explain this pattern of results. It has nothing to do with the modules. It has to do with they're getting older. They want to explore. Right? That could happen. That's what it means to have a confound or an effect of maturation as an alternative explanation. Right? One explanation for this is it was due to the modules. They made people more curious. Another explanation is it's just the natural part of maturing. Similarly, history could be a problem in this situation. Maybe less likely than maturation, but history just simply means that sometime between this pre-test and the post-test, that some historical event came out, or some noteworthy news event. You don't need to identify what that event was. That doesn't matter. Is it possible? Is it possible that Star Wars 12 came out and all of a sudden, all of the heroes are smoking cigarettes because it's cool, and everyone went to see this movie, and so they want to try it out, and so something in between here, that's an aspect of history. And again, I identified something, but you don't need to identify it. History is a possible explanation for this kind of pattern. Maybe less plausible because historical trends in smoking are that it's going down. But if this was e-cigarette use, it'd be very plausible that all of a sudden there's advertisements for e-cigarettes or something. They become available on the market and rates increase, whereas they weren't available before. That's an effect of history. It doesn't matter that whether we think it is or isn't an effect, but it's plausible. It's possible. Hawthorne effects are also a common confound in a one-group pre-test, post-test design. And this is the effect of having lots of attention put on you. In this instance, you might argue that this direction of the effect, smoking going up, is maybe the opposite of what you would expect from being observed, having an effect of being watched, of being in a study, someone paying attention to you. But it is possible. And the idea here isn't so much that we know which one is the most likely or least likely, but many explanations are plausible. And so it's hard to be conclusive about cause and effect in any one group pre-test, post-test design. Let's give her a second chance. So in our second attempt, she decided to add a comparison group. This would help. A comparison group that doesn't experience the modules would help the researcher, help Taylor to estimate or at least examine any effects of history or maturation. And the idea here is that those effects should affect both groups equally. So a maturation effect or a history effect isn't necessarily controlled, but it's estimated. But I'll get to that in a second. So this is a pre-test, post-test design, but this time she did it with a comparison group. And because she works in a school situation, she has classes of 8th graders and 9th graders, and to make her life easy, she decided to use the 9th graders as her control group, and the 8th graders who got the new computer modules. So in this case, we've got a control or a comparison group, which is the 9th graders, and then the 8th graders who get the new or the experimental treatment. Right? The IV is similar. The IV is the computer modules. This time compared to the brochure. the DV, the dependent variable, the outcome is exactly the same. You know, it's did you smoke in the last 2 weeks. Pretest, beginning of semester, computer modules, or, this slide should say, or brochures in between, and then a post-test at the end of the semester. And the results are shown here. And so at pre-test, we see that both groups are low in smoking, and at post-test, the 9th graders show a great elevation. By chance, it's the same elevation we saw in the other study, but it's an independent experiment. Those who got the new modules, as you may expect if they're good at anything, showed a slower rate of increase in trying out smoking. Right? So this pattern of results is very promising in terms of thinking about those new modules. Right? Ooh, they look effective. You know, there's a general historical trend for these students to kind of trend upwards. Both groups trend upwards, but that trend, that historical or maturational trend, is much lower with the new modules than it is with the current or the brochure, you know, the control condition. The brochures, it says current, but it's the brochures that they're getting. They're the control conditions. So these new modules look, you know, one explanation for the results is these new modules work great. But we've got to examine this with a critical eye. And a critical eye leads us to kind of work our way through some of the threats to internal validity and say, well, is that the conclusion we need to draw, that these modules are the causal factor, or are there other issues? And so some of the more likely confounds in this study, at least, are selection. Selection means that you choose groups, or there's some aspect about your groups at the start that makes them different right off the bat. They're not the same, and so you can't expect them to be the same at the end if they're the same at the beginning. And you know, that is certainly possible, right? There is a selection factor here. One group is different, most likely, than the other. You know, for one, they're older, or on average, they're older. Right? 8th graders are younger. They're probably less mature. Hint, hint. Than the 9th graders, right? So selection is an alternative explanation. It's not so much that the modules were effective, but, you know, the groups that you started with here at the beginning are not, even though they're equal in smoking, they're not the same in all respects. And so the 9th graders, because of who they are, try smoking more than the 8th graders. So selection is possible. Maturation is possible, right? 8th and 9th graders may mature at different rates, maybe trying things out, being more exploratory, is also a possibility in this study. And in particular, you know, this study really has a problem with the selection by maturation interaction, meaning the pre-existing groups you chose mature at different rates. And this one really has that. Your 9th graders may be more expected to try new things, to be more deviant, to want to explore than your 8th graders who are still kind of young. So the idea here is that the selection factor at the beginning is multiplied or interacts with the idea that they mature at different rates, which produces this same pattern of results that you see here, and is a competing alternative explanation for them. Is equally as likely as the modules are effective. Right? Hawthorne effects may also be possible in this situation as well, in part, you know, because brochures may not require much attention, although the attentional effect is kind of in the opposite direction you'd expect. A lot of it, you know, maybe the brochures, you get to meet with the person handing them out or something, and the computer modules are impersonal. There's no interaction, there's no attention, you feel less observed, it's anonymous. Hawthorne is also a possibility, but it's not as striking in this example as the selection by maturation effect in this kind of design. So I'm running up against my 15-minute limit, so I'm going to have to break this into a part 3 for this video. So I'll be back with part 3 in just a minute. I'm going to try not to make this too long.